Oh, thank you. As some of you might know, Ed Fleming and I are involved in redoing, improved Handbook of Minnesota Pre-Contact Ceramics. I'm just going to talk about part of it, and Ed will finish up his part after me. When we first approached this, we looked at the lay of the land, and we decided that there were a number of phases and/or types that really didn't need much work. You see here Laurel, Brainerd, Oneota, Cambria, Sandy Lake. We thought that the literature was sufficient to be able to, work it up and digest it to deal with the types already presented. But the rest of the state, or the rest of the phases and types and unknown phases and types, we felt needed some work. And so what we did in this phase one was to first do a history of ceramic analysis in Minnesota. Yes, there is a history of ceramic analysis. I worked on Fox Lake, which I reported on in the Midwest conference at Mankato. Malmo, Dahnke, which Jackson has just talked about. The Havanoid Middle Woodland, which Ed is going to talk about. Cord and Pressed Terminal Late Woodland, Central Minnesota Late Prehistory, and Southeast Late Woodland, which we're not going to report on. First, the early stuff. As I said, Fox Lake we've already dealt with, but Malmo and Dahnke, and Ed is going to talk about the Havanoid stuff in the Southeast. First, Jackson gave some introduction to Dahnke, so I don't need to talk much about it. Horizontal cord mark ceramics, but sometimes it has bosses or nodes, which is interesting, and it's unlike the horizontal cordage pottery found to the north, associated with Elk Lake. And of course, net impressed and vertical cord mark. We may even have some smooth sherds. They're all small samples at every site. Here's Slininger, some of the horizontal cordage, thick-walled, typical, I think, of early Dahnke. I think the bosses as well are typical of early Dahnke. And it's possible that this net impressed stuff may be early and late, but I think we find it at sites where it's the only pottery, or largely the only pottery present, so it's more than likely late. At least that would make easy sense. If it was horizontal early and net impressed late, it will never work out that way, but that's the bias I have at the present. Next, let's turn to Malmo. Malmo is well known in the literature as a name, as a placeholder, but few people could tell you what Malmo pottery was like, except that it's thick-walled and where it occurs geographically, which is the problem in with most Minnesota types. Malmo is known from a mound site in Aiken County to the northeast of Mill Locks. More than 100 mounds have been identified here. Well, so I looked at the pottery, and unfortunately, I had to set up a typology that was basically a technique of surface treatment. The problem with Middle Woodland, and Malmo is largely Middle Woodland, is that, or at least from my perspective, I'm reminded of Emperor Joseph II's response to Mozart's opera, Too Many Notes. Middle Woodland has too much diversity. It is a headache producer for a ceramicist. But so I have a Malmo Incised. If you notice, there's quite a lot of diversity. The crosshatch, well, that's Middle Woodland. The presence of nodes, that's Middle Woodland, even attempts a crosshatch here. But there are thin incisions, broad incisions, and frankly, I just lumped them all as incised, but it is present. Also, some wrapped rod or cord wrapped stick impressions, again with nodes. The dentate stamping, relatively uncommon, which is surprising because the succeeding St. Croix is nothing but, or a lot of dentate stamping. It doesn't seem to come from a focus in Malmo. There is also a composite pottery, which combines incising, cord wrap stick, wrap rod, or zoned punctations. Punctations, what can I deal with them? They're punctated. And oddly, cord impressed, which I was surprised, and I thought that maybe it was some other time period, but no, it has a crosshatch motifs, thick-walled ceramics, coarsely tempered. They fit right in with Malmo. And then some push and pull stamping that's laurel-like, I'll qualify that, and some probably bar stamping as well, almost looking like a rocker stamp. So the Malmo pottery is thick-walled with well-defined necks. There's some notching on the interior or exterior, usually plane impressions, or this cord wrap or wrapped rod impressions. So in that sense, it is distinctive and it does have characteristics, but it requires a thick description to convey what's present here. I can see it elsewhere, away from mill locks. Here it is from, these two are from Otter County. This is from Itasca County. And I think there's no problem identifying it as Malmo. One interesting observation in looking at all this early stuff is that we have a pan-middle woodland mode, a mode in the sense of Irving Rouse, that is something that's shared and cross-cuts types. And that is this alternating nodes and punctations. In this case, it's a jag, but here it is here, and here it is here. And I noticed it at Malmo sites, Fox Lake sites, Dahnke as well, also the Havanoid stuff, and Laurel as well. So really, it links all of the, basically, the nearly the entire state of Minnesota. They're doing something alike, at least one thing alike. Curiously enough, though, it's not associated with anything to do with Brainerd. And this, of course, promotes or supports the notion that Brainerd predates Middle Woodland, or Brainerd, if it continues into Middle Woodland, or what I think Malmo times, they are reluctant to adopt that mode. Let me jump up in time to Terminal Late Woodland. And what you see are the cast of characters in Terminal Late Woodland. Rainy River, Northeastern Plains, Cathio, and this is from roughly 900 to 1300, plus or minus a few hundred years. And what I want to talk about is something that wasn't known really until we started looking for it. And it's a cord impressed area, and it's in green here. And it's sort of in the center of the state. I noticed it in the west at the Shady Dell site, and you see Traverse County, cord impressions of horizontal patterns as well as geometric patterns. It's also found in eastern North Dakota. And then further east around Mankato, we have the Loomis phase. And it has cord impressions, in this case on a cord mark pot, but it can also be on a smooth pot. And so it's present in a wide stretch, and it's a fairly common pottery type when you find it. In other words, it's fairly dominant, but it doesn't seem to spread much to the south or to the north. So it's a wedge, if you will, within in the state. And it dates from about, at least the guess is 900 to 1100, but more like 1000 to 1100. So it's short-lived. This same central Minnesota angle, if you will, which I'm calling a plains wedge later in time, we see another spread of, in this case, plains affiliated pottery. These are the characters that exist on the borders, characters that exist around the border of this plains wedge, northeastern plains, Cathio, eventually Sandy Lake, initial middle Missouri and further west and later middle Missouri, and then Oneota to the southeast. And here I'm talking about probably about 1100 to 1400, somewhere in there, maybe a little earlier. In the far western part of the state, at the Browns Valley site, you have horizontal incised, also geometric incised designs on the necks of jars with punctations on the rim. These are part of Great Oasis, but the Big Tent version of Great Oasis. When you think Great Oasis, you think of that beautifully incised, thinly incised pottery that's very unique. This is not so thin or unique, but nevertheless, it's spread in a much larger area than that Great Oasis thin stuff. And if you move eastward, you see in Stearns County, Pope County, and even far away in Carver County, you see examples of this horizontal incised pattern or the Great Oasis Big Tent. So this is an extensive area. And I've also identified a type across this area from North Dakota to Carver County, and I'm calling it Waconia Incised. I first identified it as Waconia Interior Decorated because all the rims I had seen all across this area from North Dakota to Carver County had broad incised designs on the interior of the neck, which is unusual. And I thought that was diagnostic. And you see, this is an example from Lake Waconia in Carver County. Here's the interior. This is from Grant County in Minnesota, and this is from the Cheyenne River in North Dakota. And it reminded me of a pot I'd forgotten about. And here's the pot. I apologize for the reproduction. But it has interior decorations. They're vertical lines with punctations on the end, very broad in size, plain neck, a horizontal incised pattern, and then bands, vertical bands, and then something that looks Oniota-like, chevron-like. So this is, I think, what these pots are like, because at the sites where we have these necks, plain necks with interior decoration, we also have incised sherds. So I think it's all part of the same. So it's not an interior decorated type. It's an incised type that has interior decoration on the neck. Jimmy Griffin used to always tell me, you got to know 200-mile radius of whatever site you're working on to understand what's going on the site. And so here we have a 200-mile radius, if you will, a little more, spreading from the Bend region in the Cheyenne all the way down to Carver County in Minnesota. And these are examples that I have identified as Waconia Incised. Interesting. What else occurs with it? I think largely plain pottery, plain grit tempered pottery. I think it's an example of basically a culture. If I could go back to my, it's a wedge between Sandy Lake and Oniota, and eventually, or Capio and Oniota, and eventually this gets merged because Oniota moves in, and at least indirectly, into Capio, Sandy Lake. A neat story, one we haven't fleshed out yet. So what's next for us? If there is a phase 2, if we're fortunate to get it, we have to deal with late woodland. And that's essentially the final frontier, because we'll have filled in all of the other things we think. And late woodland will be a problem all in itself. We will offer a workshop with hands-on examination of types and the variability. We'll have all the stuff out, give people to look, ask questions, bring their collections, and also give tips in ceramic analysis that may help. I finished. That's it. Questions?